Thank you, everybody. Okay, so our first guest, we're just going to kind of give you an intro of what we're going to do, and then we'll do it. So we have Tina Niziurski from Beacon Health. She is a University of Georgia School of Social Work alumna, and we're excited to have her here. And then we have Rosalyn Campbell. Yeah, Dr. Campbell's here. Hey, thanks for coming. And then Dr. Campbell's going to talk next. And then we'll have Curnesia Bogans. Did I say that right? Bogans? Curnesia?
Yes, it's Bogans.
Bogans, awesome. And she is an LMFT. She's going to talk to us after that. Then we'll have Reinette Arnold. She is an LCSW with Behavioral Health Link. And then finally, we'll have Austin Hunter, who is an LPC. He's also a UGA alum, although not in the School of Social Work, and he will be joining us shortly. And then what I thought we would do is if the panel has some questions and answers for each other, or if one panelist said something that prompts something from the other, then we'll go ahead and do that. And then after that, we'll have Q&A from the general audience. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tina and take it away. And you're muted, Tina.
I know. I figured that would happen. It's good to see everyone. I see some familiar faces. I think we're coming together today for a really, really important topic. So hopefully all of us can provide you with some good information and we can have a good Q&A at the end of this. For me, I'm going to talk a lot about warning signs and reasons people consider suicide. A lot of this will be review, but some of it may be something that we haven't, you haven't talked about or hadn't thought about in the past. A few statistics that I think are important to know, and these are the most recent statistics from the Suicide Awareness Voices of Education. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US for all ages. It's actually the second leading cause of death for individuals 15 to 24 years old. Second leading cause. So just something to keep in mind as you hear us talk throughout this. And suicide is the fourth leading cause of death for adults ages 18 to 65. So when we think about the importance of talking about suicide and suicide prevention, I just want you to keep those statistics in your mind, because when we're thinking about all things that cause death, cancers, motor vehicle accidents, homicides, suicide is the second leading cause out of everything for 15 to 24-year-olds in our country. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the book, Why People Die by Suicide by Thomas Joyner. If not, it's definitely something I would recommend checking out. When I worked for Behavioral Health Link, that was one of the books our director had recommended, and I've kept it with me ever since. He really talks about why people die by suicide. And again, we use die by suicide instead of commit suicide. It really helps to take some of the stigma away. Commit really, points to a criminal act. Die by suicide, I think, humanizes it a bit more. One thing that Thomas Joyner, asks in this book is, in the wake of suicide, a lot of the most troubling questions we'll have is, should we have known that this person was going to die by suicide? What could we have done to prevent it? And the biggest question is why? Why did they do it? Why now? As far as risk factors, again, the biggest risk factors are really going to be when someone completely feels like they're a burden to their loved ones. They feel completely isolated. And at this point, they just really don't see any hope. When we would assess folks for suicidality, I think hope piece is one thing we would really highlight. If you're feeling completely hopeless and can't see towards the future, that was always a red flag for me that we needed to, dive a little deeper into what was going on. Other risk factors, of course, current mental health diagnoses. I want to point out isolation again, especially with the COVID pandemic. In my current setting, we're seeing a lot of that, where folks were doing okay for a while and then COVID hit and they're just really isolated. Financial issues, I think, is another big one, especially right now. Family issues, co-occurring medical conditions that can be really difficult for people to cope with. Family history of suicide is huge too. If you have a loved one in your family that's died by suicide, you are at a higher risk of dying by suicide yourself. And of course, substance use and abuse. When we have substances on board, alcohol, other substances, if someone's depressed and we have that, as an issue as well, we know that the risk goes way up. As far as reasons people die by suicide, I think a lot of times people just don't feel like their situation is fixable. For Thomas Joyner, a lot of the studies he did, specifically the one with the Golden Gate Bridge, people who actually survived that jump, on their way down, they realized that their issues were fixable. But a lot of times when someone, as you know, gets in a really deep depression, nothing seems like it's going to change or be fixed. And warning signs we really want to look out to. I mean, if someone's talking about death a lot, talking about suicide, talking about being a burden, they're giving away possessions, they're losing interest in things, you see a huge shift in their personality or appearance, and of course, preparatory behaviors. Someone who suddenly buys a gun when they've never had an interest in a gun, someone who you notice is just, not taking their medication, storing up pills, anything that is really out of character for that person. Another thing I wanted to highlight before I turn it over to the next speaker is sudden calmness. I know a lot of us have seen clients, and we assume that if they're suddenly calm or suddenly doing better, that's a great thing. But if they have a really long history of attempts or suicidal ideations and suddenly everything's great and they're calm, we may just want to dig a little deeper, because that can really mean that the person's made a decision to end their life. And lastly, if you feel like a loved one is suicidal, don't be afraid to ask. Find out more. Talking about suicide will not make someone suicidal, and research proves that. So it's 4:23, so I'm going to turn it over to the next speaker.
All right, thank you, Tina. That was great. So now we're going to hear from Dr. Rosalyn Campbell.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy everyone is here. This is a very important topic, and of course, it's a topic for those who know me that I feel very, very passionate about. One thing, thank you, Tina, for sharing the statistics and sharing the information about the reasons why people consider or contemplate ending their lives. And I just want to answer the question that a lot of folks still have. Yeah, but why? Yeah, but why? People intellectually, I think, understand the reasons, the statistics, they get it, but they don't get it. And what I always try to do is share my story so that you can hear from someone who experienced suicidality and also made attempts. I will not get into the details of that, but I will talk about the general circumstances and some things we want to think about. One thing is that I really want to make clear is that most of the time, people don't want to die. They want their pain to die. They want their pain to end. They want the feelings of shame they may be experiencing to end. They may want the feelings of feeling like a burden or unimportant or insignificant. They want that to end. Because of the lack of mental health literacy in our country and in other spaces, I think about my experience as a Black woman, also my experience as a Christian. These are spaces that are often not really spaces that always feel, I don't want to say safe, but open enough to have these discussions about how you may be feeling. I know, as Black folks, we think about our history in this country, and we're like, our ancestors went through slavery and the civil rights movement, and to be depressed and sad and all of these feelings and want to leave this earth, and they fought so hard, it's almost shameful. And then I think about, when I was expressing suicidal ideation, being told, I'm concerned about your soul and what happens to you afterwards. Because for Christians, they think that the act or the thought separates you from God. And for those who are Christians, that is not true. More on that at another time. Feel free to email me. We can talk about that. So there are all of these thoughts that are heaped on a person when they are struggling. And again, what I want to do is just to tell folks that, and you'll hear some more about this later from folks. It's not death that they are focusing on. It's ending their pain. And many times people do not speak about death. Again, I think about my own experience and my research around this topic. People speak about being tired. They speak about feeling like they have no energy. They talk about wanting to disappear, wishing they can go hide, all of this language. Rarely, well, I shouldn't say rarely, but many people, when they are speaking and expressing their feelings and discussing ideation, don't actually say, I want to die. That's something to think about. The other thing is, again, thinking about mental health literacy and folks not understanding what goes on when someone is depressed, when someone is anxious. And I just want to say those are not the only disorders that are associated with suicidality or gestures, but that's often what we see and experience. But we don't educate in our school systems in any major way. It's not a part of our common education that these are the signs, these are the symptoms, these are things that you look for. So when people are in distress, those around them don't know what to look for. They're not certain of the signs and the symptoms. So one thing that I want to say, even those that are professionally trained sometimes don't. I remember calling a hotline for assistance and they put me on hold. And this is also why, for the clinicians in the room, the student clinicians, this is why when you give resources, vet them first. Call yourself, see if those lines are warm, not just warm, that someone's actually going to answer, but warm in terms of response. Yes, I was left on hold. And even in my state, I said, you're not supposed to do that. I think it fired up some of my advocacy. And then I think about the paramedics having to respond once for me, and the coldness and the way in which I was treated. Again, I was, of course, in an agitated state, and the paramedic was completely disrespectful. And I remember saying, you can't talk to me like that. And my mother was like, calm down. I said, no, she cannot talk to me like that. The lack of dignity, or how people try to remove dignity from a person. I think it's important for us to remember through all of this is that people who are experiencing ideation, who are talking about wanting to leave this earth, the important thing is to stand with them. And you heard Tina say, discussing or talking about folks' feelings about suicidality, that does not lead to suicidal gesture. It's actually helpful. It's actually therapeutic. And it helps the person feel like they have a space in which to talk and that they don't feel alone, which again, many folks do. So thinking about what can we do to increase mental health literacy? What can we do to make conversations like we're having more part of a larger and broader conversation? And then what do we do in terms of helping people come up with strategies to end their pain that doesn't involve death?
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. That was really enlightening. I appreciate you sharing that. I think that the point that you made about the manner of helpers and giving dignity is something that cannot be stressed enough. And those of us as students of one of the helping professions, that we would do very well to remember that. And I wanted to thank Tina for bringing up everything she did, but especially the fact that blew my mind. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for people 15 to 24. So that really drives it home. So next, I wanted to pass it along to Reinette Arnold. And Reinette's going to talk about Georgia Crisis and Access Line and all that stuff on how we can do the right thing when we're trying to help people.
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me. And so, Tina, thank you for giving the scope. And you all can kind of see our network here. And there are many dots that connected. Dr. Campbell, thank you for giving your story and sharing what it's like on being on the other side, right? And experiencing thoughts of suicide and what it's like navigating the system. And so I'm here today to share a resource with you all. One of the questions that Dr. Campbell said is, well, what can we do? And so fortunately for us here in the state of Georgia, there are resources that are available. One resource that I'm going to talk about is under Behavioral Health Link. It's Georgia Crisis and Access Line, commonly referred to as GCAL. What is GCAL? It's a 1-800 number, and I'm going to slow it down a bit to give you all this number, and I'm going to repeat it 2 times. It's 1-800-715-4225. And please write this down, share it on social media, on your Instagram, etc. It's 1-800-715-4225. Thank you, Tina, for putting that in the chat. Absolutely. This is an amazing resource. Why is that? It's 24/7, 365 days a year. Access to someone who is caring, compassionate, and mental health providers who can provide that support. One of the things that Dr. Campbell said was, hey, the individuals who responded were not the most caring, respectful individuals. I did not feel as if I received the dignity that I deserved. And during this time, that's not what those individuals need, right? And it could be any of us who may be in this situation, or a family member or a peer. And so what we know through the data and research is that individuals wanted a caring response to that. And so here in the state of Georgia, in terms of our crisis call center, we actually have licensed mental health professionals who are on the line responding to these crisis calls throughout the state of Georgia. And so our hope is that no one will go without assistance, that we will have a connection. One of the main benefits of that is once they receive the support that's needed over the phone, we're going to take them through an assessment, identify what's going on, where are they, what resources do they have or don't have. It doesn't mean that we're going to exclude anyone. That's going to help us connect them to that next level of care. One of the main resources out of GCAL is also mobile crisis. And this is where we can really brag on what the state of Georgia is doing. Oftentimes, we hear a lot of things about what we're not doing or what we should be doing, et cetera. But this is really where we are doing something right. Through GCAL, the state also provides mobile crisis absolutely free of charge. What are the hours for that? It's also 24/7, 365. And the focus of this is to decrease barriers. And so that individuals who may be suffering in silence, who may be in rural areas, who may be isolated, have 24/7, 365 access to resources and support. So you can get a clinician who comes out into the community, whether we're going into homes, apartments, on campus, we've even gone on the side of the road, etc. I've seen it. I've been on the mobile crisis team for about 8 years now. We've done it all. We really try to meet the need and get outside the box for those who need help and support, particularly for those who are thinking about suicide, because as Tina stated, it's the 10th leading cause of death overall, 2nd leading cause of death for a particular age group. And we could tease out these data points more and more and look at specific demographics. For some, that it may be a lesser cause of death, particularly for people of color, it's also one of the fastest growing causes of death. And so that's something that we have to just be aware of and know how to connect individuals to resources. No person would be turned away. It doesn't matter if you have insurance or not, et cetera. We're going to connect that person to that next level of care. And what we know through our outcomes is across the board, when individuals are connected in a timely manner to the most appropriate level of care, the outcomes are better. And so you're getting that clinician in the community or over the phone who's going to provide that assessment to say, this is the level of care that this person needs. We're going to connect them to a provider in their community. And that's important. We're going to consider, are they able to access that resource, et cetera? Is there another resource available, or who are they currently connected to, and wrap them back into that system? And so we're here to provide support. In addition, we work very hard with our community partners. We recognize that we could not do this alone. And this is what the continuity of care is about, working with partners to increase access so that we can help individuals navigate the system. One of the main questions that we get is, what if I'm not with that person, or I live outside of the home? Can I call or help connect that person to a resource? You absolutely can, and we will assist you in navigating that process. We do try to give individuals a heads up, especially when mobile crisis is coming out, for the safety of our clinicians, but also that individuals know that, we're coming out there because we want to support them. We want to connect them to services. As you can imagine, with individuals who may be experiencing behavioral health challenges, we don't want to just pop up or bombard them. And so we do try to work with individuals to let them know that they're supported, they're respected, right? Their privacy is respected. And so we want to go about it the right way to connect them to resources and support. And our hope is that when we connect them to the right resources, they'll get the help that they need. For those who may need us again, when we do it the right way in terms of engagement, that they will reach out to us again because they will know that those are clinicians who also care. Another important factor that's also important for us to mention, anyone who receives support from mobile crisis also gets a safety plan. What is a safety plan? It's going to be that plan that identifies resources, coping skills, warning signs, individuals in the community or in their support system that can support them as well to help them in a time of crisis, so that they have an effective plan for them to refer to when that crisis starts to happen. Our goal is to prevent individuals from getting to that point where they are thinking about suicide. And so if we can do that through planning and increasing their skills, again, the research shows that the outcomes are better. We're talking a lot about research and data. Why is that? Because as a system, we recognize that we want to do what's effective. And so our programming and statewide, the way our system is set up, we've been working towards that. I see a question in the chat. It says, is the number of mobile crisis clinicians the same number as listed above? It's the phone number. Absolutely. You access mobile crisis through GCAL. And that's a systemic thing. It helps us. So we're going to go through GCAL. They're going to do an assessment to determine the next level of care. That's important because they may need a higher level of care than mobile crisis, or they may be eligible for an appointment. And so that would allow us to send out mobile crisis for those who are at risk and have a higher level of acuity. And then an appointment can go to those for a lower level, so we can meet the needs throughout the state of Georgia. I see safety plan. Absolutely. So if you all have any other questions, please let me know. I'm looking at the time to see if I'm over my time. I think I have a couple more minutes. Any questions related to what I just said? Again, that number is 1-800-715-4225. We're throughout the state of Georgia, absolutely free of charge for all individuals. I will say this, another neat thing that we do is a lot of outreach and engagement as well. What we notice is that we want individuals in the community to know about our resources and support. And we also work towards training individuals as well, whether it's on suicide prevention, system navigation, or what crises look like. Speaking of crises, one question that I get is, well, how do I know what's appropriate for a GCAL call? It's going to be any crisis that disrupts someone's ability to cope. And so that's different from person to person. I usually say, if you have a question, go ahead and reach out and call, as long as it's related to behavioral health, whether it's mental health, intellectual and developmental disability, or substance usage. From the ages of 4 and up, we can provide those resources and support.
Hey, thank you. That was really enlightening. Okay, just a reminder to mute your microphone. And once again, that number is 800-715-4225, and we'll have an opportunity to answer questions at the end. But Reinette, do you want to, I know we just got GCAL, somebody wanted to know the abbreviation for that.
It is Georgia Crisis and Access Line, and I'll write it in the chat.
Okay, so next, and I apologize, I skipped right over Curnesia Bogans, and she is a clinician, an MFT, LMFT, and she has her story to tell us about dealing with suicide as a friend, I believe it is. So take it away.
Hey everybody. I'll be very brief, and yeah, my experience is in relation to a family member that I had. So my family member and I were very close. We both were in college at the time. She was getting her master's degree here in Atlanta, and I was finishing up my undergrad. And so we came to Atlanta for school, and she would reach out to me consecutively, like all the time, reaching out, hey, let's get together, let's do this, let's do that. And me being wrapped up in my experience and what I had going on, I would say I missed the signs. I missed some of the things that I felt could have potentially assisted and helped her with not making the decision. And I carried that sense of guilt for a significant amount of time. I found out that she died by suicide via social media. And so going on Facebook and seeing that it was all of this RIP, you know, and all of these different things, my mind immediately went to, wait, I'm confused, and wrapping grief into guilt was a lot for me to overcome. And so, of course, I called my family, and as soon as I called, it was just this: she's gone, and them not having the answers or the resources. I'm from a very small rural town in South Georgia. Suicide, especially as Dr. Campbell was stating, suicide is not something that a lot of people of color talk about, a lot of families of color talk about. Even now to this day, they still won't talk about it. And what happened with her death, and the things that we may or may not have missed. But I will say that that experience definitely added to the type of work that I do. That experience also allowed me to know that there is things that, you know, you can do as a clinician, and that is to know that you are enough and that you are doing enough, you know, by reaching out to different resources that you have, and knowing that you are enough as a clinician, knowing that you are enough as a person, and that we can be able to separate the act from the person that, you know, is experiencing these different things. So I hope that gives you a few things very briefly to know that it can be rough, it can be challenging for us as people as well as clinicians to kind of tackle all of these things, because at the end of the day, we are human too. But at the same time, the more that we connect ourselves to the resources that are beyond us for the help and the assistance that we need as clinicians, as well as the people that we see as clients, I think that it makes the world and who we are in our world in this profession a better place.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. I wanted to, I know you mentioned I think you and Dr. Campbell both mentioned the silence in the Black community and in communities of people of color. And just want to let everybody know we are working on bringing a panel next month, mid to end of October, on suicide in the Black community, and some of the special factors that we need to consider if we are social workers and helping people, and some of the special threats and risks that people in that community have. So I really appreciate that. And I wanted to just, before we move on to Austin, just mentioned that this is sponsored by Bridging the Gap, which is a practice therapy group at University of Georgia School of Social Work. So if you're not a member, please consider becoming one. You can find information on the School of Social Work's website, and we'll probably post something up later. So without further ado, I want to take it to Austin Hunter. Austin is a UGA graduate from his bachelor's days, and then he went on to get his counseling license from somewhere else, but that's okay. We'll still have him. So tell us, Austin, I believe you had a personal story, and then you want to tell us about CAMS. Is that right?
Absolutely. And hearing Curnesia's story really resonates in a lot of ways. Because during my time in Athens, I had a friend who had been dealing with suicidal thoughts. And of course, none of us knew that. All we saw was the withdrawal, sudden isolation, not a lot of interest in things that had been important to him in the past. And then, like yourself, finding out a day after the event that he had died from suicide. Now, I'm struck by the event of his funeral, in which when we all came together, the word suicide never made an appearance in the entire 3-hour program. And 2 weeks later, another one of our close friends also died to suicide. Because when we can't discuss these things, what we end up doing is creating a stigmatism of being the person who is having the thoughts. Now, I'm here to talk about CAMS because that's what I'm trained in, but there's nothing particularly magical about the collaborative assessment and management of suicidality in comparison to other tools. If you get trained in your program using the ASQ or the SAFE-T or the PSS-3, what's important is what all of these tools have in common, and that they allow the person who's having the thoughts about suicide to exist without being told that who they are and what they're experiencing is an invalid experience. When I bring CAMS or any other assessment tool to my own clients, what I'm trying to do is let them know that because you're having these thoughts does not invalidate your existence. Just as Dr. Campbell was talking about, most people who go on to take an act of suicide, most people who act on those thoughts, it's not a desire to be dead, although sometimes that is present, but most often in a desire to escape the pain of the life that they are leaving. And yet so often the very people who are helpers, those of us who are trained in therapy or therapy adjacent, those of you who are going on to be therapists and social workers and combinations of the two, will find that people come to your office and you will notice that there's something deep and heavy about them. They might be having some furtive language about, maybe I bought a gun recently, or I've been thinking about not wanting to exist, or I have really looked at oncoming traffic with a different kind of eye. Notice the reaction in yourself. Very likely it's the same reaction that they are having as a client when they bring up these ideas. It's that I'm afraid to talk about this, because in every other aspect of my life, these kind of thoughts are just simply not allowed. And if you, as a helper, go on to try and circumnavigate that topic, well, I'm not going to bring up suicidality explicitly. I'm going to talk about other things that are going on. You know, how depressed are you? You having thoughts about not wanting to be alive? And when you don't use that word, what you're doing is reinforcing these are inappropriate thoughts. You cannot be someone who thinks this. And as a result, we end up further solidifying in their mind that if I'm having these thoughts and these thoughts aren't allowed, but I'm still having them, then I cannot be. Now, what CAMS and other assessment tools come in and they say, what we've noticed through research after research, pages and pages of articles, is that when you name suicide in the session, you have an immediate reduction in the power of those thoughts. It is completely contrary and opposite to what we are sociologically, socioculturally taught to believe, is that this is a taboo topic. You don't bring these things up because what if you put that thought into your client's mind? There's no one on earth who doesn't know what suicide is. You're not going to create a thought that didn't already exist. Instead, what you're going to do is bring out into the open, you having these thoughts in no way reduces who you are as a person. So when you move through something like CAMS, you're essentially going to be looking at, so if the suicidality is a functional thought, it's a functional behavior. No one just randomly has a thought of, I want to take my own life, but instead it's to serve the purpose of reducing or eliminating something that they just no longer can stand in their life. On CAMS, that would be looking at psychological pain, stress, agitation, hopelessness, self-hate. But really what these boil down to, or what I want everyone to hear, are the big three. If you hear any of these three, or especially more than one, come up in your sessions, your antenna should perk up. Hey, I need to bring suicide, the word, into this room and talk about it so that we can have an open space. It's helpless, hopeless, and worthless. If you hear any combination of those words, there should be an immediate perk up in yourself to go, this person is likely considering not wanting to be alive anymore. Now let's look how extensive those thoughts actually are. When you're a therapist, when you're one-on-one, face-to-face with someone else in the room, what you are becoming is a container for their emotions. these things which they can't hold within themselves, these things that are so painful that they're unable to manage, the crisis moment, is they're going to be able to use you to contain those during your hour or 2 hour session. And if you can hold those together, you can show them that these things not only are legitimate, but can be held. There's a question at the end of the first part of the CAMS assessment, which says, I wish to live to the following extent. You answer that 1 through 8, followed by a question that says, I wish to die to the following extent. And you'll be shocked that even people with incredibly high levels of psychological pain and distress, when answering that question, might be shocked by just how little they want to die and how much they actually want to live. That it really wasn't about suicide, but that suicide had been seemingly their only option, which is itself a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And when we can frame things in those words, we can say the magic question, the one thing that would help me to no longer feel suicidal would be blank. And it's amazing just the level of awe, the deep breath that comes into the room when people think about this, because it really puts into perspective that yes, suicide was serving a function, but it's not the only solution that could serve that same function. And that if we can slow it down and really allow ourselves to put that out there and say, yeah, suicide's on the table, and so are all of these other things. How can we work together to negotiate our energy away from suicide and to these things that will get the same goal? Now, that's really painful. It's really hard to do. It takes a lot of energy. And you, as the therapist, are lending your hope to the client as they generate it themselves over time. Now, from there, you get into your treatment planning. You get into a lot of the more nuts and bolts specifics of using a collaborative assessment, which you're all going to get plenty of training on. And if you don't, there's so much training available online. But what is so important is that you take that as a framework where you know with confidence when someone comes into my office or into my clinic and they're experiencing suicide, I can handle that. You have resources at your disposal beyond this. I loved everything we learned about the Georgia Crisis Access Line today. I use that line. These are people you can trust, where you know you're not having to call the police. You know, in Kentucky, if someone was having suicidality, we literally had to call the police to come to their house. But in Georgia, you all have these resources where a mobile clinic shows up, does an assessment, and it's not to have people locked up, but to figure out how can I, in the least restrictive environment possible, make sure that you are well and safe, and you're going to be here to talk to me again next week. When you can put it in those terms, there's no end to the amount of energy you can put the client's way. When you start to put things in their terms, okay, so if we know some possible other solutions, when we start to put together a treatment plan around that, what does that give us? What do we have in place? How do we reduce the harm and increase the good? How do we turn away from the things we're avoiding and towards the things we want to connect to? So as you go forward, if you take away anything from what I've said today, is that don't be afraid to say the S word, suicide. It's really uncomfortable, but in doing so, you might actually save a life. Thank you. Now, unfortunately, I have to jet because I'm about to go and lead a group therapy virtually for people who are dealing with suicidal affect. So I'm putting this stuff into practice. I believe what I'm talking about. I hope that you all can get a lot from this. I wish I was going to be around for the question and answer session because I want to ask some questions to some of the speakers here. They're awesome. Use this time. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Austin. Keep fighting the good fight. All right. Thank you. And so we had some great speakers here. And I just want to give our speakers a chance to ask questions, comment amongst themselves before I open it up to the rest of the crowd. So does anybody on our panel have any comments they wanted to make?
I just wanted to thank everyone and just, in talking about my experience and the fact that, I too am a clinician and, just the many different connects. And I was really listening to what Austin was saying. I was actually trained on the use of CAMS. And sadly, many of our schools of social work, I'm going to speak about social work, but I would offer to say many across disciplines do not talk enough about suicidality. and how to help and things that we can do. Many times, and I saw the language of safety plan, the fact that folks are still talking about suicide contracts and getting a person to say that they will not act or make a gesture just goes to show you that we have a lot of work to do in this area in terms of being comfortable saying the word suicide, recognizing it as something that folks would consider. So, I think often about our training and the things that we can do. And I think about what I can do as a social work educator. And part of that is sharing my story. Some folks don't feel comfortable doing that or don't have a story to share. But another thing we can do is we can look for resources that put the conversation very clearly and very boldly on the table, because as Austin said, you literally can be saving a life.
Thank you.
And Dave, I just wanted to say, I wanted to speak to Reinette's piece on GCAL. A lot of times we'll hear about resources and be apprehensive or even question, do they really offer what they're saying they offer? I just wanted to say, I can attest to the fact that everything Reinette said, GCAL offers, they do. I work there on the crisis hotline and mobile crisis. I couldn't get enough, right? And it's real. Throughout every county in Georgia, there are teams that will come out. It doesn't matter if the person's at the McDonald's, at their home, at the church, on the street, they will go out no matter where the crisis is, whether it's 3 a.m. or 3 p.m. So again, that's legit. And it's, a great resource that, like someone else, I think Austin said, other states don't have. Other states, some don't have a lot of crisis protocols. So definitely utilize GCAL when in doubt. And there is if someone thinks it's a crisis, they should call. There's not, that's not enough of a crisis. No, they'll assess and then they'll determine what needs to happen. So Reinette, thank you for sharing all that info, because I feel even day to day, I mention it to patients and even colleagues, and some people still don't know about the resource. So it's out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And I will say this, we work very hard as an agency between GCAL as well as mobile to support the needs of those who are in crisis in Georgia. We are constantly trying to improve our services to make sure that we can meet the need. Keep in mind, we're serving throughout the state of Georgia. And so we're not a perfect system, right? We're making improvements systemically. One of the things that I will say, because we do talk about some of the limitations up front, one of the things that Dr. Campbell mentioned was being on hold. And unfortunately, because of the need for us in the state of Georgia, sometimes when individuals do call, those calls are being queued and they may get a wait time. How do we help individuals navigate that is the question. One, we encourage individuals to not wait until there's a crisis for them to call. Call us when you know that there's something behavioral health related going on so that we can connect you to the services. Also keep in mind that one of the big differences between us and another call center, particularly within the United States, we're one of the few that actually has licensed mental health professionals. Many of the call centers actually have volunteers. And while we appreciate the work that they are doing amazing and important work, and we appreciate them for stepping up to the plate. Again, Georgia has something different where you have licensed mental health professionals who are triaging those calls, providing support in hopes to, on the first go round, connect them to that next appropriate level of care and a high quality practice or agency that is funded by DBHTD and all of those things. So we're all working together as a system to make sure that individuals are connected. And so again, I just want to reiterate that we are beefing up and preparing for 988, which is going to be similar to 911, but specific to suicide as well. So again, these are improvements that are happening on a national level and specifically in Georgia. Now, what does that mean for Georgia? One of the differences and the reasons we have a leg up is because we have a current infrastructure that supports that 988. We already have the call center, and we also have mobile crisis. So we're weaving together these different components to make sure that people have the support that they need.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I will say this, 988 isn't up yet. It isn't running yet. However, so don't doubt that just yet. But it's coming. Okay, give us until 2022 to be officially up and running. So use the 1-800-715-4225 right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any of the other speakers have anything they wanted to add before I open it up to the crowd? Okay. All right. So if anybody has any questions, just we'll just try unmuting and asking. And
I'll try unmuting. Hello, everybody. Thank you, panel, for being just wonderful. My name is not Camille, but I think my daughter renamed me because my daughter's name is Camille. I was curious about what assessment tool GCAL works. I teach in the School of Social Work, and I teach CAMS right now, and I've been trained in QPRT and the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, but I'm curious how GCAL does it.
So we have a mixture. We use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, but we also have the LOCUS as well. And it's going to be, so we're big on innovation and technology. We've actually created and woven that together to create our own assessment tools, but those are some of the components of it. Mobile uses the same. It's a seamless system of care across the board. And then we're going to use that to collect the data to determine that next level of care.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad I asked. I don't know. You said LOCUS?
Yes, it's the level of care. Level of care.
Oh, the level of care. I see.
Yeah.
Yep. I know what you're. Yep. Thank you.
And we use the adult and the adolescent one, the child and adolescent one.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
anybody have any questions? Anyone else?
Hi, this is Tamika. I do have a question. And this is to all of our panelists. Us as college students, or even working with our peers, I'm just looking for suggestions on how we can spread the word more about some of the information that's been shared today. I mean, outside of seminars like this, any suggestions on what we could do individually or collectively to spread the word a little more?
I'd like to start off because I have a feeling some of our panelists will talk about actual resources, which gets at your question, Tamika. But I'd also like to say to talk more openly about how you all are really doing. And I know that's so hard in some, spaces of learning, also in workplaces. It's very hard, particularly in our culture, to admit that there's a problem or that there's something wrong. At least that's how we view mental health, that if you're experiencing a challenge, something is wrong with you. And I think it's really important that we switch that narrative and we talk about mental health like we would talk about anything else. And that the more that you all are open about what's going on, checking in with each other, that at least opens the door for conversations so that, as was said before, folks are not getting to crisis states before resources are available. So I will just put that plug in that I would love to see us normalize these conversations around mental health and mental health care and services.
And I'm going to add to that right after Dr. Campbell, because I feel like this is a good segue for that. One of the things, especially during the pandemic, that I stopped doing is asking people, how are you doing or are you okay? Because we're conditioned when someone asks you that to automatically say, I'm fine, I'm okay. And so I noticed that when I was talking to, whether it was friends, colleagues, clients, et cetera, they would do that plug, I'm okay, I'm fine. And I'm like, I know we're not okay. We're in the middle of a pandemic. No one has experienced this before, right? It's so many transitions. And so I changed my language to how are you managing and how are you coping? And when I started to ask people that, it was like a pause that they had. It almost hits a different part of the brain. It's not an automatic response. And it's also based off the premise that I already know that you are coping or managing through this chaos that is happening. And so how are you doing, or how are you managing and coping through that? And so people started to have more open, honest conversations with me when I started reframing my questions. in reference to sharing information, this was a huge one for me as well, especially 8 years ago when I came on board at BHL. I got immersed in the suicide prevention world. I completed my master's at UGA. And so I will say this, I did get the opportunity to participate in a suicide class through the University of Georgia. Not every clinician gets that. But this immersion into this field, the data and statistics, et cetera, it was alarming for me. And so what I started to do was have conversations with my network, just general conversations. Hey, did you know this? What about this data point? What do you think about this? And I also started sharing some of the data points on social media as well, kind of like a did you know type thing, and it sparked conversations. There's also agencies, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, Mental Health of America, NAMI, et cetera, all of these agencies that provide information and literature that's already produced. Start sharing that on your Facebook as well, so that you can start the conversation and just drop seeds for people to talk about. What we know is that when we have the conversation, it doesn't normalize the act of suicide, it normalizes the discussion. For people to say, hey, I didn't know this about that, for people to start talking, eyes and ears to be open, share information on the risk factors and the warning signs and what it looks like, et cetera, so that individuals in our community to know. One of the unfortunate thing is we're all on this call because there's a particular interest or we work in this field, right? We want the community to know because they're the eyes and the ears of those who are suffering in silence.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, just one more thing I wanted to add to Reinette's point. Even for me with clients, especially new clients, what I have started doing, especially since the pandemic, is to ask them for a rating on a scale of 1 to 10. How would you rate your week or your day? And that gives them an opportunity to be a little more specific with where they are, and that creates dialogue for us to continue the conversation of what that rating means. Okay, if it's a 2 or a 3, okay, well, what's going on? What's happening for you? And how is that serving you or not serving you? So I would definitely say adding that rating point to be more specific and building from that is helpful for me.
Thank you.
I think that also just speaks to the different ways in which people conceptualize or think about their well-being or what's going on with them. So having a variety of methods to engage folks into those conversations is very useful.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you, panelists, for coming and teaching us just a tiny bit of what we need to know about suicide, because I know there is a large amount that we all are learning. And I really appreciate you taking the time and coming out and sharing your story. I wanted to pass it along before we go to Heather Lee. She is the president of the sponsoring group of this chat, Bridging the Gap Practice Therapy Group. Take it away.
Okay, so a quick little plug. First off, all props to Dave. He was definitely the one who spearheaded this collaboration with Bridging the Gap. And the recording will be put up on our website, which is btgptguga.wixsite.com. And I've actually, it's in the chat earlier. In fact, I might be able to do it again. Done. Okay. Yay for copy paste. So feel free to come on over there and look at resources. If any of you would like to come over and speak again on a different topic, we would love to have you. Our officers that we will vote in for next semester would love to have you. Absolutely. And if there are some of you on the call who want to be officers, we would love to have you, because all of us as officers are graduating this May. And if we want this to continue, we need new blood, man. We need new blood. So we're leaving, but not in a good way. Well, in a good way, but not that way. So I definitely want to extend my thanks to all of our panelists and to all of our guests who were here today for your questions and for your wisdom from our panelists. I very much appreciate you.
Yes, thank you. And just to give you a sneak preview of what we're working on for the rest of the year, we're looking at a panel on suicide in the Black communities. And we're also looking at suicide in LGBTQ communities. And we are looking at some CAMS training. So we're looking at doing foundational training, and then and my words are escaping me right now, but it's the training where you actually get to practice working with somebody. So hopefully we'll be doing that. And we're also looking at one about suicide in rural communities for the spring. So keep coming to the places that you learned about this, and you'll learn about that. So thank you, everybody, and everybody have a great night.
I would just like to thank you all, Bridging the Gap. When I saw you all come on as an organization, I was so happy and really just excited to see you all taking control of your education, giving your colleagues and yourselves an opportunity that sometimes we as educators can't get it all into our class or get it all in there. So I'm really just glad to see that you all took ownership of how you wanted to engage your education and that you started this organization. It's good to see. I'm willing to support you all in whatever way I can. I just take my hat off to you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. And actually, before we let you go, David, I don't have it queued up, but do you have the link for the survey for our students that you can throw into chat real quick?
I do not. I apologize.
Okay, give me a second. Let me see if I can. One of the things we are doing this year a little bit differently for Bridging the Gap is, as a student, if you are here, we have a little survey for you to fill out so we can keep track of the different activities you have come to, so we can give you a shiny certificate at the end of the additional hours that you have sought out. So if you can hang tight for a few minutes, I'm going to go look for it and try to plug it into the chat. So I'm going to mute myself, but hang tight.
All right. Any other questions anybody has, or any ideas for talks that you'd like to see or panels you'd like to see this year?
I know that one I often hear from students and is, how do I talk to a friend, or how do I talk to someone who I think needs help or something like that? That would be really good, because I know many of us are clinicians or in training or have had some type of experience, but there may be others that just, or for how they were socialized or for a variety of reasons, may not feel comfortable or know how to have that conversation. And I think as was, I believe it was Curnesia talked a little bit about her experience and feelings of guilt. It's thinking preventatively. How can we, and of course, it's never anyone's fault. I definitely want to say that, but how can we assist those folks who want to help or come across someone in need to be able to have that conversation? If it's tough for us as clinicians, I know it's even harder for those who we consider to be lay individuals.
Okay, thank you. And I see Tina said suicide amongst first responders. So, okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and y'all have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.